The city of Vatican was unusually quiet that morning. Normally, the streets were filled with tourists, pilgrims, and the gentle murmur of life in one of the smallest countries in the world. But today, everything seemed different. There was a stillness in the air, as if the world itself had paused to honor someone very important. Pope Francis, the beloved spiritual leader, had passed away, and the Vatican was preparing for his funeral. News of his death had spread quickly, touching hearts across the globe. People from every corner of the world were coming to pay their respects, many of them traveling long distances driven by love and reverence. The city was calm, but underneath that calm, there was a quiet tension, a mixture of grief, respect, and anticipation. Amid this solemn atmosphere, a small elderly dog walked quietly through the Vatican gardens. He was not just any dog. He had lived within the Vatican for many years, roaming the gardens and courtyards often seen near the Pope's private quarters. Though he had no name that was widely known outside the Vatican walls, those who worked there called him quietly Amico, which meant friend. The dog had grown familiar with the people who lived and worked in the Vatican, and he had a special connection with Pope Francis. Over the years, the dog had shared many silent moments with the Pope, small walks in the gardens, quiet companionship during evening prayers, and even moments of comfort when the Pope seemed tired or sad. No one had ever needed to tell him what to do. He just understood. And today, something in the air made him move differently, more purposeful, as though he sensed the gravity of the moment ahead. Inside St. Peter's Basilica, preparations were underway. The grand halls were being arranged for the ceremony, and the air was heavy with the scent of incense and flowers. Clergy members moved quietly, placing candles, arranging seats, and preparing the altar. Guards and officials were organizing the entry of visitors, ensuring that everything proceeded with solemn order. Outside, the crowds were gathering, their voices hushed in anticipation. People carried banners, flowers, and photographs, some of them kneeling in prayer while others simply stood in quiet reflection. Each person seemed to feel the weight of the moment, as if their own hearts were tied to the life of the Pope and the service that was about to take place. Amico, the Vatican dog, moved carefully among the shadows of the buildings, his paws making little noise on the cobblestones. He did not rush. He did not push through the crowd. Instead, he walked slowly with a steady, thoughtful pace. There was something almost human in the way he moved, as though he too was aware of the importance of what was about to happen. Occasionally, a guard or a clergy member would notice him and offer a small nod or smile. They had grown used to the dog's presence over the years, and they knew he had a gentle heart and a keen sense of understanding. No one tried to stop him as he moved closer to the basilica. There was a quiet respect in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that this little creature had earned his place in this moment of mourning. As the morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the basilica, the grandeur of the space became even more evident. Marble floors gleamed, high ceilings seemed to reach toward heaven, and golden decorations reflected the light in gentle patterns. People began to enter slowly, their footsteps echoing softly, blending with the faint whispers of prayer. The dog paused at the edge of the entrance, observing the scene with wide, alert eyes. He watched as cardinals dressed in red robes took their positions near the front. He noticed the priests arranging the flowers, the guards standing at attention, and the photographers preparing their cameras. Everything was precise, everything had to be perfect. And yet, amidst all this formality, there was a warmth in the air, a shared love for the man who had guided them all. Amico took a deep breath in his own way, sniffing the air that smelled of flowers, incense, and polished wood. Memories of his time with the Pope came to him in flashes. He remembered the first time he had seen the Pope in the gardens, the gentle way the man had reached out to pat him, and the quiet conversations that no one else could hear. He remembered the times when the Pope had knelt on the stone paths to pray, and the dog had sat beside him, patient and silent, offering comfort without words. Over the years, their bond had grown strong. The Pope had always been kind to animals, and in return, the dog had become his quiet companion, loyal and understanding. Today, all of that history weighed on the little dog in a way that was impossible to explain in human terms, but the sense of purpose in his heart was clear. As more people entered the basilica, the crowd swelled with dignitaries, faithful, and visitors from around the world. Some carried cameras trying to capture the solemn beauty of the ceremony. Others held their hands together in prayer, tears quietly forming in their eyes. The atmosphere was heavy with emotion, yet also filled with a sense of reverence. Everyone felt that they were part of something larger than themselves, a moment that transcended daily life, politics, and personal concerns. This was a time to honor a man whose life had touched so many, and the quiet respect of the crowd mirrored the silent devotion of the dog outside. The coffin was ready, draped in white, simple yet dignified. Candles flickered softly nearby, casting gentle shadows across the marble floor. Priests moved carefully around it, making final adjustments and ensuring that everything was in place. The air seemed almost electric with anticipation. Even the guards, who were used to ceremonies and protocol, felt the weight of the moment. They straightened their posture, their eyes scanning the crowd, aware that every movement was being watched and remembered. And outside the main hall, Amico waited, his ears twitching, his gaze fixed forward. He did not need instructions. He knew that his moment was approaching. Finally, the time came for the procession to begin. The doors of the Basilica opened wide and a hush fell over the crowd. Those in attendance held their breath as the coffin was carefully carried into the grand hall, followed by cardinals and clergy members in ceremonial robes. The dog, sensing the movement, stepped forward quietly. He walked at a careful pace, moving closer to where the coffin would rest. People began to notice him, but instead of shooing him away, they watched with quiet curiosity. It was as if the dog's presence added something sacred to the moment, a reminder of loyalty, love, and the simple purity of connection that needed no words. His steps were small but steady, each one deliberate, echoing softly on the marble floors. Inside, the air was filled with the soft sound of prayers, whispered chants, and the gentle rustling of robes. Flowers surrounded the coffin in a delicate arrangement, and light filtered in through stained glass windows, creating a kaleidoscope of colors on the floor. The dog moved past rows of seats, pausing occasionally to glance at the faces around him. Some visitors were moved by his presence, recognizing the deep bond between animals and humans and the silent comfort they can provide in times of sorrow. Others felt a strange sense of awe, as if the dog's calm demeanor mirrored the serenity that the Pope himself had always carried. Everyone seemed to understand, even without speaking, that this small creature had a role in this farewell, a role that transcended the ordinary and touched the extraordinary. As the coffin settled in its place at the front of the basilica, Amico paused near it. He did not rush. He did not jump or bark. Instead, he sat down quietly, his eyes fixed on the white-clothed casket. In that moment, he became a symbol of the deep, unspoken connection between life, love, and loyalty. The mourners around him felt the weight of the gesture, even if they did not yet fully understand it. Some whispered to each other, "Look at the dog. He seems to know." Others simply bowed their heads, their hearts quietly acknowledging the shared grief. The Basilica was now a place not only of human sorrow and respect, but also of silent animal devotion. The hours before the ceremony were filled with this delicate balance of preparation and waiting. Amico remained seated, calm and patient, as the priests and cardinals continued their final arrangements. The dog's steady presence became a quiet anchor in a room full of emotion. Visitors and officials alike began to notice that there was something different about this funeral, something that went beyond ceremony and tradition. The dog was more than an observer. He was part of the farewell, part of the memory, part of the love that everyone felt for the man who had guided them spiritually and morally for so many years. Even in silence, he communicated a message of loyalty, understanding, and compassion that words could never fully capture. As the morning turned toward midday, the basilica continued to fill. Cameras were adjusted, microphones tested, and every detail double-checked. The air was thick with anticipation, and yet, amidst all this preparation, the dog remained calm. He did not move restlessly or bark. He simply sat near the coffin, his head slightly tilted, watching everything unfold. The people around him began to realize that this little creature, who had spent so many years quietly observing life in the Vatican, had now become a participant in one of the most important ceremonies of recent history. His presence was gentle but powerful, a reminder that love, loyalty, and devotion exist in many forms, and sometimes the simplest gestures leave the deepest impressions. By the time the funeral was about to begin, Amico had captured the attention of everyone. As the basilica filled with mourners, the air grew heavier with emotion. People whispered quietly among themselves, sharing memories of Pope Francis, his words of kindness, and the gentle wisdom that had touched lives across the world. Among the crowd were cardinals in red robes, priests in white cassocks, and faithful visitors who had traveled for days to pay their respects. Each person carried a sense of awe and grief, knowing they were part of a historic moment. Yet amid all this human presence, there was a silent observer whose role, though unnoticed at first, would become unforgettable. Amico, the Vatican dog. Amico sat near the front, just a few feet from the coffin. His eyes, dark and calm, were fixed on the white cloth covering the Pope. For anyone watching closely, it was clear that he understood the gravity of the moment. He did not fidget, bark, or move about. Instead, he remained perfectly still, his small body an anchor of quiet devotion in a room filled with sorrow. People began to notice him gradually. Some whispered to their neighbors, pointing at the dog and saying, "Look, he knows. He is waiting." Others simply stared, unsure of why a dog would sit so attentively. Yet they felt a warmth in their hearts, an unspoken connection bridging human and animal understanding. The ceremony began in earnest. Priests and cardinals chanted prayers, their voices echoing through the enormous halls of the Basilica. The sound was both solemn and comforting, filling the space with reverence. Incense rose in thin spirals, carrying with it the aroma of myrrh and frankincense, adding a layer of sacredness to the air. Flowers, carefully arranged by Vatican staff, created a path of beauty around the coffin. White lilies, roses, and orchids surrounded the Pope, their petals soft and delicate, almost as if they were bowing in respect. Through it all, Amico's gaze never wavered. He watched the movement of every person, the folding of hands in prayer, the lowering of heads in mourning, and the quiet tears that glistened in eyes around him. The dog's presence became a quiet comfort to those nearby. For some, seeing him sit so calmly was a reminder of the simple and pure forms of loyalty that exist in the world. Many visitors felt moved, recalling their own pets or animals who had shown them love and understanding without asking for anything in return. Children who had come with their parents were fascinated by him. They pointed quietly, some kneeling to get a better view, sensing the dog's importance in this sacred moment even if they could not fully understand it. Adults, too, were captivated. Some felt their hearts soften, realizing that grief and love are universal emotions, shared not only among humans but across all living beings. Memories of Pope Francis's love for animals began to float in the minds of those present. Stories of how he cared for stray cats and dogs in the streets of Rome, how he would sometimes feed them in the gardens, and how he would kneel to speak gently to them, spread quietly among the attendees. Some whispered to each other about the small gestures the Pope had made over the years, gestures that went unnoticed by the wider world, but were deeply meaningful to those who had witnessed them. In a way, Amico's presence at the funeral was a continuation of those gestures, a living embodiment of the Pope's message of compassion and kindness toward all creatures. As the ceremony progressed, more visitors began to gather near the front, drawn by a combination of reverence and curiosity. Many cameras were raised discreetly, capturing the scene, but even in those photographs the dog stood out. He was not part of the planned ceremony, yet his quiet dignity made him the focal point for some who watched. The priests noticed him as well. At first, they exchanged surprised glances, unsure of how to react. But seeing his calm and respectful demeanor, they simply nodded and allowed him to remain. No one wanted to disrupt the peaceful presence of this small but significant companion. Amico's behavior was remarkable. He did not seek attention, did not beg for food, and did not whine or bark. He simply stayed seated, his gaze fixed, his posture composed, and his breathing slow and steady. It was as if he knew exactly what was happening, as if he understood the importance of the ceremony and the role he was playing in it. Some attendees found themselves leaning closer to see him better, sensing a strange connection between their own grief and the dog's quiet mourning. They felt that he too was offering his respect and love for the man who had touched so many lives. In this shared silence, an unspoken understanding passed between humans and dog alike, a reminder of the profound ways in which loyalty and love can manifest. Time seemed to move slowly. The chanting continued, prayers were offered, and the atmosphere became thick with emotion. Visitors who had come expecting a traditional ceremony found themselves witnessing something far more touching. They noticed how the dog seemed almost to communicate with the Pope through his silent attention. Every movement of Amico was subtle yet full of meaning. He shifted slightly, lifted his head a little higher, and kept his eyes on the coffin. In that moment, those who observed him felt that love and devotion could exist beyond words. They saw grief expressed in quiet presence, loyalty shown in stillness, and care communicated in silence. The dog became a living symbol of what it meant to honor someone truly, without the need for elaborate gestures or speeches. At one point, a few cardinals whispered among themselves, commenting softly on how unusual it was to have an animal so composed at a ceremony of this magnitude, but even they could not deny the profound effect the dog had on the room. Visitors turned to one another, sharing small smiles and nods of agreement. Some felt a sense of relief amid their grief, comforted by the purity of the dog's presence. It was as if he reminded them that love and loyalty are simple, unwavering truths that can exist even in the midst of sorrow. In the quiet gaze of a small dog, people found a reflection of their own feelings, a mirror of the respect and admiration they held for Pope Francis. As the ceremony continued, more stories of the Pope's kindness toward animals spread quietly among those present. Attendees recalled how he had always emphasized that caring for animals was an important part of living a compassionate life. They remembered how he had spoken about mercy, empathy, and responsibility, not only toward people but also toward the creatures that share our world. Many felt that Amico's presence was a living continuation of that philosophy, a demonstration that love, loyalty, and respect transcend the boundaries of species. The dog's calm and steady behavior became a lesson in itself, teaching observers about the depth of devotion and the simplicity of true connection. Throughout all of this, Amico did not move from his place near the coffin. He seemed to draw strength from the ceremony, as if he understood that this was a final farewell to someone who had been his companion and friend. He had spent years in the Vatican, and he had spent many moments with the Pope in quiet, private ways. Those memories, though invisible to human eyes, guided him in the present moment. Each breath he took, each blink of his eyes carried the weight of his understanding. And as the crowd watched, slowly but surely, they began to feel the same deep sense of respect and love that the dog was expressing. His presence was no longer just an animal in the room. He had become a participant in the ceremony, a silent witness to a historic farewell, and a messenger of devotion without words. By now, the mood in the Basilica had grown almost reverent. Attendees were fully absorbed in the ceremony, yet they could not ignore the quiet presence of the dog. Children leaned closer to their parents, asking soft questions. Adults whispered explanations about the bond between animals and humans. Even the cameras seemed to pause in capturing the moment, as if the observers themselves sensed that something extraordinary was unfolding. The dog's calm and patient demeanor was a grounding force in a space filled with grief. In the midst of a world accustomed to pomp, speeches, and rituals, the simplicity of a small dog sitting quietly near the coffin reminded everyone of the purest forms of love and respect. Hours passed as the ceremony continued. Prayers echoed, candles flickered, and visitors came forward to pay their respects, each taking a moment to reflect on the life of Pope Francis. Throughout all this, Amico remained near the coffin, never straying, never demanding attention, and never losing focus. He seemed to understand that the ceremony was not just about rituals and traditions, but about connection, memory, and honoring a life well lived. People began to see the dog as a bridge between grief and comfort, a symbol of the quiet, enduring presence that love can provide. In his stillness, they found a lesson in humility, devotion, and the beauty of silent companionship. And so the dog sat, unwavering, as the Basilica filled with voices, prayers, and tears. The crowd began to sense that they were witnessing something far beyond a simple funeral. They were seeing the quiet power of loyalty, the depth of a bond that transcended words, and the grace of a small creature who understood the importance of being present in a moment of profound loss. Amico, the Vatican dog, had become more than a witness. He had become a symbol, a reminder that love, devotion, and respect are not measured by grand gestures but by presence, understanding, and the courage to be quietly devoted when it matters most. The ceremony moved forward, solemn and steady, with the echoes of prayers filling the vast halls of St. Peter's Basilica. Each word of the liturgy, each soft chant resonated deeply with the people in attendance. Their eyes were wet with tears, their hands pressed together in prayer and their hearts heavy with loss. Yet through the quiet emotion of the room, all eyes could not help but be drawn to one small figure, Amico, the Vatican dog, sitting near the Pope's coffin. His calm, unwavering presence had become almost magnetic, a quiet beacon of devotion amidst the sea of human sorrow. As the eulogies began, priests and cardinals spoke of Pope Francis's lifetime of kindness, his humble ways and his commitment to helping the poor, the sick and the forgotten. They spoke of his quiet moments of prayer, his love for simplicity, and his extraordinary compassion for all living beings. While the words were moving, they were accompanied by the silent power of the dog's gaze, fixed upon the coffin as if he, too, were absorbing every detail, every sentiment, and every heartfelt word being shared. The visitors around him began to notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. There was something extraordinary in the way he sat there, small yet steadfast, offering a silent tribute that spoke louder than words ever could. Then, in a moment that seemed to hold time itself, Amico slowly rose to his feet. His movements were deliberate but gentle. No one anticipated it. No one had seen him do anything like this before. He walked slowly toward the edge of the coffin, moving with a grace that belied his small size and advanced age. The room, already hushed, grew even quieter. Every head turned, every eye followed him. Some held their breath, unsure of what was about to happen. Others whispered softly, "Look at him. What is he doing?" The dog's eyes remained focused, unwavering, as though he understood the gravity of the moment and the importance of the gesture he was about to make. With careful steps, Amico placed his small head gently against the white-clothed coffin. His chin rested lightly and he remained perfectly still. The sound of a soft collective gasp echoed through the basilica. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing the extraordinary sight, but the significance went far beyond what any photograph could convey. The dog's action communicated a depth of emotion that no human voice could replicate. Here was loyalty, devotion, and love expressed in its purest form. In that quiet gesture, it was as if the dog was saying goodbye in the only way he knew how, with presence, with sincerity, and with unwavering fidelity. Mourners felt the impact immediately. Some cried openly, unable to contain the emotions stirred by such a simple yet profound display. Others clasped their hands to their hearts, struck by the purity of the moment. It was not just grief, it was an understanding, an acknowledgement of love that transcended language and species. Even the priests and cardinals, accustomed to solemn ceremonies and ritualized mourning, found themselves momentarily caught off guard. They exchanged glances, nodding in quiet agreement that this small creature had brought something extraordinary to the ceremony. It was as though Amico's gentle act had elevated the funeral, reminding everyone that devotion is not measured in words or gestures alone, but in presence and quiet understanding. The children who had come with their parents watched in awe. Their wide eyes reflected wonder and curiosity. Some pointed softly, whispering to their parents, "Look at the dog. He loves him too." Adults too felt a stirring within them. For many, this small animal, a humble dog sitting quietly by a coffin, became a mirror to their own feelings. It reminded them of the times they had loved and lost, of companions both human and animal who had shared their lives. In that moment, grief and devotion were no longer separate experiences. They were united in a shared recognition of the depth of love, loyalty, and respect. News photographers captured the moment, but even they knew that no camera could truly capture the emotion in the room. It was more than an image, it was a feeling, a vibration of reverence that touched the heart of everyone present. The dog's eyes, steady and focused, seemed to communicate not just sorrow, but also a deep sense of peace. There was no panic, no confusion, no frantic energy, just presence, just love. And in that stillness, the attendees found solace. They felt in some inexplicable way that the Pope himself would have approved, that he would have understood this silent tribute as perfectly fitting for a farewell. The priest continued with the ceremony, offering prayers and blessings, but the dog remained where he had positioned himself. The quietness of his devotion contrasted beautifully with the rhythmic chants and ceremonial movements around him. It was a reminder that grief can be gentle, that love can be expressed without words, and that even the smallest act of loyalty can leave a lasting impression. The people in the Basilica sensed that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would remain in their memories for years to come. Even the air seemed to carry a different weight, heavy with reverence and thick with the shared emotion of countless hearts. As the ceremony moved toward its later stages, more people quietly approached the front, drawn by the profound image of the dog at the coffin. Some knelt, some bowed their heads, and some simply stood, silently observing. They felt that the dog was offering a kind of comfort to all present, a reminder that love endures, that loyalty does not fade, and that even in loss, connection persists. It was a lesson in empathy, conveyed by a creature without speech yet more eloquent than any human oration could ever be. People exchanged glances, nodded to one another, and some murmured softly about the remarkable presence of this small companion who had managed to capture the attention and hearts of everyone in the room. The dog's quiet vigil continued as the cardinals prepared to speak their final words. Each moment seemed longer than the last, stretching into eternity. The dog's unwavering focus on the coffin, his gentle breathing and his composed posture made a lasting impression on everyone. Some whispered prayers for him as well, acknowledging his devotion and the comfort he brought to the room simply by being there. The dog became, for that brief yet eternal period, a bridge between the living and the departed, between human grief and the gentle, instinctive understanding of a loyal animal. It was a connection that transcended culture, language, and species, a universal expression of love and loyalty. As the ceremony neared its conclusion, the magnitude of the dog's gesture became even more apparent. People began to recognize that this small act, simple as it seemed, carried the weight of years of devotion and shared moments. They thought of Pope Francis, his gentle smiles, his compassion for all living beings, and his unwavering commitment to kindness. In this context, the dog's action was more than a personal tribute. It was a reflection of the values the Pope had lived by. The room, filled with humans expressing sorrow, was complemented by a quiet, dignified expression of loyalty and grief from a creature who had loved in the only way he could. Finally, as the service reached the part of silent reflection, the dog remained at the coffin, his head still resting gently upon it. Time seemed suspended. Visitors, some weeping, some smiling softly, all understood the moment's significance. It was not only about the life of Pope Francis, but also about the quiet, unspoken bonds that endure even in death. The dog, who had shared so many silent moments with the Pope, had now provided a moment for everyone in the Basilica to feel a deep, personal connection to the legacy of love, humility, and devotion that the Pope left behind. In those minutes, the dog's simple act became a symbol of all that was good and pure about devotion. People would speak of this moment for years to come. They would remember the quiet power of presence, the gentle communication of loyalty, and the extraordinary ability of a small, humble creature to move the hearts of thousands. Children would retell the story to their friends, adults would share it with family, and even those far from Vatican City would hear about the remarkable dog who sat by the coffin, leaving the entire basilica in awe and silence. Through it all, Amico did not move from his place. He simply continued his quiet vigil, his head resting softly, his eyes watching, breathing steady and calm. He did not need to do more. He had already expressed the depth of his feelings and left a lasting impression that words could not capture. In his small, dignified presence, everyone saw the purest form of devotion, loyalty, love, and respect without expectation, a silent farewell to a man who had touched the world. After the dog rested his head gently on the Pope's coffin, a hush fell over St. Peter's Basilica that was deeper than anything that had come before. It was as if time had paused, allowing everyone present to feel the quiet weight of the moment. The air was filled with emotion, not loud or overwhelming, but steady and gentle, like a soft current pulling everyone into reflection. Visitors of all ages from different countries and cultures were united in a shared understanding of loss, loyalty, and love. Many bowed their heads, some wiped tears from their cheeks, and others simply watched the small dog in awe, realizing that he had become part of the ceremony in a way no one could have predicted. His act of silent devotion had transformed the atmosphere, and the people sensed that they were witnessing something extraordinary, something that would remain in their hearts forever. Amico remained seated by the coffin, still impatient, as mourners slowly approached to pay their respects. People moved quietly down the aisles, careful not to disturb the small figure who had captured their attention. Visitors whispered to one another, marveling at the loyalty and love the dog displayed. "He is so calm," someone murmured. "He seems to understand the importance of this moment," another added. It was a shared sentiment, felt across language barriers and cultural differences. The dog's presence had a unifying effect, reminding everyone that grief, love, and devotion were universal emotions that could be understood by all living beings, human or animal. The children who had come with their families were particularly captivated. They knelt on the floor, their small eyes wide with wonder, pointing at the dog and whispering to their parents, "He is sad too. He loved him." Parents smiled softly, realizing that this simple act of a dog sitting quietly beside a coffin was teaching their children a lesson about loyalty, respect, and empathy. Even the youngest observers sensed the depth of the moment, understanding in their own innocent way that love could be expressed in silent, meaningful gestures. For many of them, it was a first glimpse of the profound connections that could exist between creatures, a lesson they would carry with them for a lifetime. Clergy members, too, were struck by the dog's presence. Cardinals and priests exchanged subtle glances, some whispering quietly to one another about the significance of the scene. They had been part of countless ceremonies, but rarely had they witnessed anything so moving and unexpected. Amico, in his quiet vigil, had reminded them that devotion and love are not limited to humans. His behavior echoed the Pope's own teachings about kindness, compassion, and care for all living beings. For a brief suspended moment, the formal protocols and ceremonial grandeur faded into the background, replaced by a sense of shared humanity and the recognition of a universal truth. Love is expressed in presence, care and attention regardless of size, species, or language. Visitors who had traveled long distances to attend the funeral now approached the front with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Some knelt, others touched the edge of the coffin, and a few simply stood quietly watching the dog with awe. Many whispered prayers silently, acknowledging not only the Pope's life but also the dog's remarkable devotion. The atmosphere was thick with reflection, as people considered the small but profound ways that loyalty and love could manifest in their own lives. The dog had, in a single gesture, inspired countless hearts to think about relationships, empathy, and the quiet ways that devotion could be shown to those we care about. As the ceremony continued, stories of Pope Francis's personal kindness toward animals began to circulate quietly among the attendees. Visitors shared soft anecdotes about how the Pope had fed stray cats in Rome, rescued lost animals, and gently spoken to creatures that others might have overlooked. Many recalled the countless times he had emphasized that compassion should extend to all beings, not just humans. In this context, Amico's presence was more than symbolic. It was a living continuation of the Pope's message. He embodied the principles the Pope had taught throughout his life: love without expectation, loyalty without conditions, and empathy without boundaries. The dog's calm presence began to affect everyone in subtle ways. People felt their own grief soften, replaced by a quiet warmth that spread through the room. Some wept softly, moved by the purity of the moment. Others smiled faintly, recognizing the beauty of a simple act of devotion that spoke louder than words. Children reached out instinctively to touch the dog, only to be gently guided by parents who wanted to preserve the sanctity of the moment. Even the photographers, who had been busy capturing images of the ceremony, paused to simply observe, recognizing that what was happening could not be fully captured by a camera. It was a feeling, an experience, and a lesson all at once. As the visitors filed past the front, Amico remained seated, his head still resting lightly on the coffin. Every now and then he shifted slightly, adjusting his posture without losing focus, his movements deliberate and meaningful. Observers began to notice how the dog seemed to carry not only his own emotions, but also the collective grief of the room. In a strange and beautiful way, he had become a vessel for mourning, a silent companion who reflected the emotions of those around him. People felt that the dog's presence brought a sense of peace, a gentle comfort amidst the sorrow, reminding everyone that love and loyalty could provide strength even in moments of profound loss. The priests continued their prayers and blessings, their voices low and rhythmic, but it was the dog who held the attention of many in the Basilica. His simple act of placing his head against the coffin had shifted the focus from ceremony to sentiment. Observers were reminded that devotion is often expressed in quiet ways, through stillness, presence, and attentiveness. The dog's behavior became a teaching moment, one that transcended religious, cultural, and national boundaries. Everyone in the room, regardless of their background, could understand the message. Loyalty, love, and respect do not require words. They are shown through actions, no matter how small. Slowly, the visitors began to approach Amico, moving closer with gentle steps. Some knelt to get a better view, their hands clasped in prayer, while others simply watched in quiet reverence. The dog did not react to their attention. He remained focused, steady, and calm. It was as if he understood that his role was not to seek recognition or affection, but to offer silent comfort and to honor the Pope in the way he knew best. This quiet dignity left a lasting impression on everyone. People were moved not only by their grief for the Pope, but also by the lesson of loyalty and devotion embodied in the small dog's actions. As the ceremony progressed toward its later stages, a sense of unity grew among the attendees. Conversations slowed to whispers, tears were shared silently, and hearts seemed to beat together in a shared rhythm of mourning and remembrance. The dog's steadfast presence became a symbol of stability amidst the emotions that swirled through the room. People felt connected not only to the memory of Pope Francis but also to each other, drawn together by the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. The dog, through his quiet and deliberate actions, had become a focal point for empathy and reflection. Amico remained by the coffin long after most of the visitors had passed by. His eyes never left the white cloth that covered the Pope's body, and his small, steady breathing became almost a meditative rhythm for those who stopped to observe him. People began to reflect on their own relationships, their own expressions of love and loyalty, and the ways in which they might offer silent support to those they cared for. The dog's actions were simple, yet they carried profound meaning. In that sacred space, amid grief, devotion, and prayer, everyone could see the power of a quiet, unwavering presence. By the end of the ceremony, Amico had not moved from his place. The visitors who remained for the final moments observed him with reverence, recognizing that they had witnessed a rare and moving demonstration of loyalty. The dog had offered comfort, presence, and an example of devotion that transcended human understanding. In the hushed moments following the prayers, some approached quietly to touch his fur gently, offering a soft pat in gratitude for his silent vigil. Others simply watched, their hearts full of awe and gratitude for the quiet lesson the dog had provided. Amico had transformed the funeral from a ceremony into an unforgettable moment of reflection and connection. In his quiet presence, mourners had been reminded of the importance of love, loyalty, and empathy. The dog had shown that devotion is not always expressed in words or grand gestures, but can be communicated through stillness, attentiveness, and a quiet, unwavering heart. His presence had left the entire basilica in awe, and everyone who witnessed it would carry the memory forever, inspired by the purity of his actions and the depth of his connection to Pope Francis. The funeral of Pope Francis had ended, but the quiet reverence in St. Peter's Basilica lingered like a soft echo. Visitors slowly filed out, their hearts heavy with sorrow yet touched by the unforgettable moments they had witnessed. Among them, Amico, the small Vatican dog, had remained steadfast by the coffin for hours, offering his silent vigil until the very last moment. Now, as the people departed, a stillness settled over the basilica, broken only by the soft footsteps of clergy and guards moving about to close the ceremony. The dog's presence had become emblematic of devotion, loyalty, and the simple purity of love, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who had been present. Amico finally rose from his place beside the coffin. His movements were slow but purposeful. He walked alongside the side of the basilica, keeping a respectful distance from the remaining staff. The guards, accustomed to both the protocol and the dog's usual gentle nature, quietly guided him without rushing him. It was as if even they understood that Amico's actions were not just those of a pet. They were part of the ceremony itself, a living symbol of a bond that transcended words. Visitors who had lingered to take one last look at the dog found themselves pausing, reflecting on the extraordinary loyalty and calmness they had witnessed. Outside the basilica, sunlight bathed the Vatican grounds in a gentle glow. The crowds had thinned, leaving behind a quiet peace. Amico wandered slowly through the gardens, his head held high and his movements measured. He stopped occasionally to sniff at familiar spots, places where he and Pope Francis had once shared quiet moments of companionship. The gardens, usually lively with birds and soft rustling of leaves, seemed subdued, as if they too were in mourning. Amico's steps were steady, his eyes reflective, as if he carried the weight of the Pope's passing within him. People who had lingered to watch saw him move with dignity, an unspoken testament to the quiet, enduring bond he shared with the man who had been his friend and protector. In the hours that followed, the story of the dog at the Pope's coffin spread quickly. Photographs captured by journalists circulated through newspapers, television broadcasts, and social media platforms around the world. People were captivated by the image of a small dog, sitting quietly by the coffin of one of the most beloved spiritual leaders in history. The photograph became symbolic, representing loyalty, empathy, and the universal capacity for love. Many remarked that it reminded them of the importance of connection, of showing devotion, and of expressing care in subtle, meaningful ways. The story of Amico resonated far beyond Vatican City, reaching hearts across continents and inspiring a sense of shared humanity. Families shared the story with children, emphasizing the lessons of loyalty and respect. Adults reflected on the ways in which love could be expressed silently, through actions rather than words. Social media users posted images of the dog, writing about the profound simplicity of his gesture and the emotional power it carried. Animal lovers everywhere celebrated the moment as a reminder that creatures can perceive grief, devotion, and love in ways that are both subtle and profound. In many ways, Amico's act became a lesson for humanity, teaching that empathy and loyalty are universal languages understood by all living beings. Back in the Vatican, staff and clergy began to clean and prepare the Basilica for the next day, but the impact of Amico's presence was still felt. Some members of the clergy quietly commented to one another about how moving it was to see a dog, so small and unassuming, express such profound loyalty. They spoke about how the Pope's kindness toward animals had created a legacy that extended even into his final moments. Amico had become a living embodiment of the Pope's teachings, demonstrating the values of compassion, patience, and presence in a way that everyone could understand. His quiet vigil had bridged the gap between grief and comfort, leaving a lasting impression on all who had witnessed it. Even the media, often focused on grand gestures or dramatic moments, recognized the significance of the dog's action. Journalists described Amico as a silent companion, a witness to history and a symbol of enduring love. Commentators reflected on how the dog's simple act had captured the hearts of thousands and reminded people of the importance of humility, loyalty, and devotion. In a world often filled with noise, controversy, and distraction, the image of a small dog sitting quietly by a coffin provided a moment of clarity, a reminder that the purest expressions of love are often those that require no words at all. As the sun began to set over Vatican City, Amico made his way to the familiar gardens where he had spent many peaceful moments with Pope Francis. He paused at a spot near a small fountain, the same place where the Pope had often knelt to pray while the dog waited patiently nearby. Amico sat quietly, his eyes reflecting the soft golden light, and for a moment it seemed as though he was remembering all the times they had shared. Memories of gentle pats, quiet walks, and moments of mutual comfort filled the space around him. Invisible yet palpable, those who glimpsed him at that time felt a sense of peace, recognizing that loyalty and love persist even in the absence of those we care for. Word of Amico's devotion continued to spread. People who had attended the funeral shared their stories with friends and family, describing the quiet dignity of the dog and the extraordinary emotional impact of his presence. Religious leaders praised the moment as a reminder that devotion transcends language and species. Animal welfare organizations highlighted the story as an example of the deep connections that can exist between humans and animals, inspiring people to reflect on their own relationships with the creatures in their lives. In living rooms, classrooms, and offices around the world, people spoke of Amico, marveling at the quiet, simple gesture that had moved so many hearts. In the following days, journalists and photographers returned to the Vatican gardens to capture images of the dog in his natural environment. They found him wandering among the flowers, pausing thoughtfully near familiar paths, and resting in the soft shade of trees. People visiting the Vatican sought to see him, hoping to witness the humble creature who had touched the hearts of so many. Visitors quietly approached, offering gentle words and soft pats, but Amico remained composed and calm, a quiet observer of the world that continued even after the extraordinary events of the funeral. His presence continued to inspire, reminding everyone that love, loyalty, and devotion are not measured in words but in quiet, consistent actions, even as the world moved on. The image of the dog sitting by Pope Francis's coffin remained etched in memory. Families told their children about the moment, emphasizing the lessons of empathy, patience, and presence. Religious leaders referenced the story in speeches and sermons, drawing parallels between the dog's actions and the Pope's teachings. People reflected on their own lives, considering how they could express love and loyalty in simple, meaningful ways. The story of Amico became more than just an anecdote. It became a symbol of devotion, a reminder that the simplest gestures can carry the deepest significance. Months later, Amico continued to live within the Vatican grounds, wandering the gardens and courtyards that had been so familiar to him. Visitors who returned to the Basilica would often seek him out, drawn by the memory of the quiet vigil he had held. He remained humble, gentle, and composed, carrying the lessons of that day in every step. In the hearts of all who had witnessed him, he represented something larger than life, a testament to the power of loyalty, the beauty of quiet devotion, and the enduring presence of love, even in the face of loss. Through his small, steady actions, he had shown the world that even the simplest gestures could leave an unforgettable mark. The legacy of the Pope's funeral, and the dog who had become a symbol of devotion, lived on. People continued to share the story, inspired by the quiet courage and loyalty of Amico. His presence reminded humanity of the importance of empathy, the power of connection, and the beauty of expressing love through actions rather than words. The world had witnessed something rare and profound, a small, humble creature demonstrating that loyalty and devotion are universal, transcending all boundaries and leaving a lasting impact on the hearts of those who observed it. And so, as the Vatican returned to its usual rhythm of life, Amico remained, quietly watching over the grounds, a silent guardian of memory, love, and devotion. The story of the dog who sat by Pope Francis' coffin became a lasting reminder that love is simple, loyalty is profound, and even the smallest acts of presence can echo across the hearts of countless people. Those who had been present at the funeral, and those who learned of it afterward, would carry the lesson forever. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words, and a small act of devotion can leave a legacy far greater than anyone could imagine.